What's up, guys? We are back, part 3, and actually the final part in our series on program design. I know you're sad to see it come to an end, but this is a series that I hope helps you guys write out your own training programs, something that can either help you or your clients out quite a bit. All right, that's enough. Let's get into it. Part 3, here we go. So we talked about step 3 and step 4 in our last. Now we're going to talk about 5, 6, and 7. So step 5, what is it? It's training load. So this is what most people care about the most. They want to know what's the load on the bar. Just kidding. This is what guys care about the most. Girls, for the most part, don't really give a shit about this. Guys, how much you bench? It's the classic question. So how do we assign load? Well, assigning load is a matter of goals and season. Yet again, I know you guys are really sick of me hearing me say, "Oh, well, it depends." But it depends. So for hypertrophy, if your goal is hypertrophy to grow the muscle, you want to train somewhere between a 5 and a 30 RM. And I know what some people will say, "Well, what about that Schoenfeld study that showed that 3 reps were just as good as 30 reps when you equate for volume and intensity?" Okay, yes, that is true, but in good faith, I can't tell someone to train for hypertrophy at a 3 RM. All right, you got 10 triples today. Coach, can I do 3 sets of 10 instead? Nope, 10 triples. So I like to say in between 5 RM to 30 RM. And to be completely honest, full disclosure here, I don't really even like 30 RM that much. If it was up to me, if I wanted to give my personal suggestion here, I'd say somewhere between a 5 RM and a 15 RM is plenty. If your goal is strength and power, you should be training at less than a 5 RM, especially if you are in a strength phase or if you are in a peaking phase. If you're in a hypertrophy phase, then you want to train within ranges that are more conducive to hypertrophy. Sport performance, it's going to depend on the actual sport. So when we look at sports and we look at some of the textbooks that talk about sports performance, we talk about multiple and single effort sports. So a multiple effort sport is something like basketball, where the individual needs to make multiple explosive movements or multiple explosive plays before they get a rest. Whereas something like golf would be a single effort sport, to where you swing, it's maximal, or it's single in effort. Sometimes it's maximal, sometimes it's not. And then you get an extended rest period before you have to go again. But again, we're leaving sports performance out of this. Now, what repetitions you actually train at are going to be personal preference based on what you enjoy the most. But there are some caveats to that as well. You can't just say, "I like training with 30 reps across the board." And we're going to talk about some of those caveats. So the first one would be isolation versus a compound movement. The example that I would give here is, what's more appropriate? 5 reps of lying leg curls or 5 reps of stiff leg deadlift? Most people would say, well, it's the stiff leg deadlift. Your compound movement is more catered towards lower repetitions, whereas the isolation exercise is more catered to higher repetitions. And that has a lot to do with risk reward of injury risk. A set of 15 on stiff leg deadlift, your technique may start to degrade as you go, and as technique goes down, injury risk starts to go up. The second caveat here is effective versus ineffective reps. So it's become extremely popular. A lot of people are talking about it now, is this concept of effective reps. And how do I get to those effective reps? Well, I have to fatigue through my low threshold motor units, my type 1 fibers, to make my way up to those type 2 fibers. And in a set of 30, let's say we're doing a set of 30 to failure, those last 4, 5, 6, maybe even up to 7 repetitions, the ones that people are calling, or that a lot of practitioners are calling the effective ones, you have to do 20, 23, 25 other reps that are still fatiguing to the body before you actually get into the effective reps for that specific muscle group. So is it worth it? Where I could start with a set of 8 or a set of 12 instead and get to those effective reps faster. So how many ineffective reps or lower threshold motor unit fatiguing reps do you want to do before you get to the more effective ones? And that can be dictated by some of the things below here. So injuries and limitations. Maybe you've got a lower back injury, a knee injury. So I can talk personally about myself. When I used to squat heavy quite frequently, I had pretty bad bursitis in my knees, and anytime I would try and go heavy on leg press, leg extension, walking lunge, squat, didn't really matter what it was, that would flare up. So I had to take an extended period of time where I trained between 20 and 30 RM. And did I enjoy it? No, I didn't. But it was something that I had to do based off my injuries and my limitations. So know your own limitations, know the injuries that your clients are working through, and adjust the load and the repetitions that they're working at accordingly. Because you can still get just as much hypertrophy training with 20 reps or 30 reps as you can with 5 or 8 or 10. It's just going to take a lot longer to get to the reps that actually matter, the ones that are the most effective. The final point is how much you like vomiting. So how much are you really enjoying that, what people call the mental toughness aspect of training? True story, I had someone come up to me in the gym one day and tell me that he was going to start doing sets of 50 on squat. I said, okay, that's a good endeavor. We play devil's advocate here and hear this guy out. Why? He said, oh, mental toughness. The vomiting really makes me tough. Okay, if that's how you feel, then that's how you feel. That's fine and dandy. But most of us, we don't like vomiting in our training. It takes away from our training. So if a set of 30 makes you throw up and a set of 8 doesn't, and they both grow the same amount of muscle, which one are you going to choose? Well, most sane individuals are going to choose the set that isn't vomit-inducing. And if we look at the full text of Dr. Schoenfeld's, I think it was the 3 versus 30 repetition study, he actually talks about how there was a lot of vomiting in the 30 rep group. And I think some people even dropped out of the study because they just weren't really feeling all of the puking. Most people try to avoid that, and a good way to avoid that is train at lower repetitions with a heavier load. So now some pros and cons of lifting with a heavier weight versus a lighter weight. So with your heavier weights, the pro here is you're going to start to tap into and use the high threshold motor units earlier on in the set. Let's say you're training with your 8 RM, so your 8 rep max. Within the first couple reps of that set, you're going to be targeting those high threshold motor units, those type 2 muscle fibers. Whereas with a lighter weight, it's going to take you longer to fatigue up to that. The con of training with heavier weights is there's a higher injury risk. And that higher injury risk is not only tied to the heavier weight, but it's tied to technique degradation. Your technique gets worse with heavier weights, especially across a set, and injury risk goes up. So if you are stopping a set at somewhere around an RPE 8 or an RPE of 9 before your technique starts to kind of slip or become less than quality, the injury risk is actually quite low. But what happens when you get into those 1 RIR and those 0 RIR weeks where you really got to push for it? There's a joke in weightlifting that if the rep looked perfect, you can put some more weight on the bar. What that means is that technique ain't going to be beautiful when you're hitting a true 1 RM. But for hypertrophy training, we need technique to be perfect. We need technique to be very, very pristine if we want to be training for a long time and reduce our injury risk. And sometimes that can be an issue when training with heavier weights. And the pro for lighter weights is there's lower injury risk. So getting up to 135 on squat, very few people who are strong, let's say we take a 300-pound squatter and they're squatting 135, they're not going to be getting injured, or they shouldn't be getting injured, training with such a low load. So that's one advantage to lighter weights, is that the injury risk is significantly lower. However, there's a big con here that most people don't like, and that's that with lower weights, you need to do more repetitions to fatigue through your type 1 muscle fibers and the low threshold motor units to get to those effective reps where you're targeting the type 2 muscle fibers, the ones that grow faster and they grow significantly more on an absolute scale. Some people don't mind doing that stuff though, but some people, they don't really like the burn. They don't like that huge muscle pump, all the metabolite accumulation, the acidosis that occurs. Some people don't really like that. And remember, you can grow muscle just fine without any of that. And the way to do that is with the heavier weights. So where am I at on this? I'm in the camp of moderate weight. Let's use a weight that allows you to reach a 0 or a 1 RIR in your final week before deload, somewhere in the 6 to 15 repetition range. If we go above 15, just add a little bit more load to bring us down into that range. I've heard A lot of coaches, a lot of practitioners, super, super smart guys and gals in the industry say that the best way to get bigger is to get stronger in the 6 to 15 repetition range. And I absolutely agree with that. Keep it in that range. The weights won't be too heavy to where they're injurious, and they won't be too light to where they're actually vomiting inducing. Now, here's a little bit of a controversy, because I've heard people say this, they quote it all the time. They say that volume is the king for hypertrophy, and that is just not true. It's not true, because load and intensity are the most important training variable. So whether it's relative intensity or absolute intensity, the most important variable is intensity. That is the number one box that you have to check, and then we make our way down to training volume, which is the second most important variable. Remember that intensity, whether it's relative or absolute, is going to dictate tension. And tension is what causes the hypertrophic cascade, that downstream cascade that leads to muscle growth. It started with intensity, and then it is brought on or pushed forward by the volume that you do. But it all starts with intensity. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise, because you can do all the volume in the world, 10 repetitions shy of failure, and you won't grow very much muscle. Now, the next question is going to be, how much intensity is enough? And again, it depends. So it depends, number one, on the sport, the activity, and the goal that you're trying to achieve. So how much intensity is enough? Like I said on the last slide, it's probably somewhere in that 6 to 15 repetition max range. So if you look at the chart on the left, that's going to be somewhere between 85 and 65% of your 1 rep max. And if you've ever read like a personal training book, or maybe you took the CSCS exam, you'll see that the hypertrophy range that most people shoot for is that 65 to 85% of 1 RM, anywhere from 4 to 1 repetition shy of failure. Keep it there and you'll grow plenty. Now, 1 RM or multiple RM testing. We talked about this in the needs analysis section, but we'll touch on it again. In team sports, multiple RM. Low risk, high reward there. So you've got some numbers to work with, and you can test from season to season or year to year if the athlete's actually getting stronger. That's important right there. You need to know that kind of stuff. Powerlifting and weightlifting, you need to get a true 1 RM. And in something like weightlifting, you actually want to get a 1 RM for some variance as well. So you want to get a 1 RM for a power snatch, or a clean from blocks above the knee, or a clean grip deadlift, front squat, things like that are going to carry over to the competition lifts. So if you're a weightlifter, I'm sure you do a lot of 1 RM testing, powerlifting as well. But the powerlifting 1 RM testing is going to be a little bit more specific to the squat, the bench, and the deadlift, the competition lifts. Now, for bodybuilding or hypertrophy training, 1 RM and multiple RM testing kind of lose their value. And we talked about this in the needs analysis section. We talked about how, yes, it could give us some information that can have some value, but at the end of the day, because we are going to be using a relative intensity or an auto-regulated approach, we don't really need to know a 1 RM or a multiple RM to base percentages off of, because we're mainly going to be using RPE and RIR. And the reason that we use those is the bullet point below. It's to auto-regulate the training. So what do I mean by auto-regulation? Auto-regulation in your training allows for good days and bad days while still progressing. So if I go from a 3 RIR day to a 2 RIR day, I've added an effective rep, or I'm closer to failure. Even if I have a bad day of training, I've still progressed because I haven't violated the overload principle. I've made training more difficult over time by training at a closer proximity to failure. However, one downside of this auto-regulated relative intensity approach is that there is a learning process. So in my experience, it takes clients anywhere from 2 up to 6 weeks to really learn and have a strong grasp on this style of training. They'll usually undershoot or overshoot by quite a bit, which can lead to some unfortunate training down the line. But after they learn this stuff, the complaints that were like, I hate this stuff sucks, all of a sudden turn into, wow, this stuff's amazing. It allows me to kind of have a good day of training or have a bad day of training, really push on some days and pull back on other days, and know that I'm still progressing. So on the grand scheme of things, I would give this like a B+ as a grade. So there is that learning process, but once you learn, it's all gravy. Now another option here for training load is that from week to week, you can progress load or you can progress repetitions based off RIRs. So another advantage to this auto-regulated approach is we can add load when it's appropriate, and we can add repetitions when they're appropriate. So how do I do things? I do a combination of all of these. So sometimes from week to week, I'll add a set. I've gotten away from that a little bit more. Mostly, I'll just progress the RIRs from week to week. So in week 1, we'll find a good baseline weight. That's a 4 RIR. Week 2, we'll go down to 3 RIR with a load increase. So maybe they did 8 reps at 225 on bench press in week 1. The sheets that I use will automatically increase the weight for them and bring the RIR down. So maybe they're down to 6 reps at the heavier weight, 245 we'll call it. And then they add reps from week to week from there because the RIRs are dropping. So that's how I do things. And I've had a lot of success with that. And I'm sure that I'll change the way I do things in the future. But for now, that's kind of how I'm doing it. And I'm really, really enjoying it. My clients are progressing very, very quickly. I'm also progressing very quickly on it. Step number 6. All right, step number 6 is going to be volume. Man, it was probably 1 or 2 years ago. It's probably 2 years ago when people really started talking about volume. They really wanted to know, how do I track my volume? Do I track it in total sets? Do I track it in total repetitions? Total poundage? I'm doing 50,000 pounds of squat volume, therefore I'm better than you. Or is it the final two? The final two have gotten more popular as time has gone along. And I want to give credit to Greg Nuckols because Greg Nuckols was talking about hard sets a long time ago. We're talking about 4 or 5 years ago. I think it was 2014 when I first heard Greg Nuckols talking about hard sets. And it's kind of come back around full circle. People aren't really talking about tonnage or total sets or total reps. They're saying, all right, how much of the effective stuff, how much of the real stuff that works, the hard sets or the effective reps am I doing? Because that's what's actually going to contribute to hypertrophy the most. And that's the stuff that I should be tracking. One note based off experience level is that in beginners, single set programs sometimes outperform multiple set programs because the recovery capacity isn't quite there yet. But as soon as you move forward from being a beginner, you're intermediate or you're advanced, then you want to start doing these multiple set programs. That doesn't mean that as you go from intermediate to advanced, you want to be doing 5, 6, 8, 10, 20 sets per movement because you're getting more advanced. It just means that you need to do more than a beginner because you've got increased recovery capacity. But recovery capacity doesn't increase infinitely. You're going to get to an upper limit of what you can actually recover from. Now, an argument against high volume or higher volume training that I'll see a lot from people is, what about HIT, the style of training that was probably popularized or used most by Dorian Yates, or something like dog crap style training? So we'll break them down one at a time. So high intensity training, people will say it's a low volume training program, but it's not. It really isn't. Because if you look at the old training videos of Dorian Yates, or you hear him talking about his training, he always talks about how he would do one easier set. And if you watch the videos, it looks like it's around 4 or 5 repetitions shy of failure. A moderate set that looks to be around 2 to 3 repetitions shy of failure. And then his hard set, which is an all-out set to failure. That's 3 hard sets right there. That's a decent amount of volume right there. That's by no means is that a low volume training program. You'll say, okay, well, screw the HIT. You're right there. But what about dog crap training? They only do 1 set. And again, I say, well, if you look at dog crap training, are they actually only doing 1 set? Because whether it's a myo rep or a rest pause, whatever it is, they're fitting 2, 3, 4 hard sets into what they call 1 set. So let's say you're doing leg press, you do a set of 10 to failure or close to failure, and then you rest for a very short period, and then you do another set close to failure, and then another set close to failure, and then maybe even a 4th set close to failure. What you've actually done is, it may have looked like 1 set because the sets were so clustered together, but you've actually done 4 sets there. You may have gotten 3 or 4 effective reps on that first set, and then you do 4 more on the next, and then 3 more, and then 2 more. Count up the effective reps, and it's something like 12, 13 effective reps in a single set, which you could have gotten over 3 sets. So again, different ways to skin the same cat. We're accomplishing the same goal here. And then we get into the next question, or the next argument from people on the interwebs. Well, can you do too many sets? Intuitive answer would be yes, you can. But there's some details that we need to get into here. And I'll tell you where I stand on it. Because when we look at things like the Brad Schoenfeld, the 45 sets a week study, or the Cody Hahn study, which I believe, sorry if I get this wrong, was up to 60 sets per week per body part, which is absolutely nutty. And these 45 set groups and these 60 set groups still grew muscle. They grew more muscle than the other groups, or at least comparable to the other groups. So what does this actually tell us? Is it telling us that more volume is better? It's not telling us that. What it is telling us is that in the short period, in an acute period, an 8 to 12 week window, the body is extremely plastic and extremely adaptable and can respond to an immense stimulus and can respond pretty favorably. However, if we took that Schoenfeld 45 set a week protocol or the Hahn 60 set a week protocol and we extrapolated that out and we had someone do it over the course of an entire year, what I suspect, or what I hypothesize would happen, would be that the higher volume groups would actually get outperformed by the moderate volume groups just because their recovery capacity couldn't keep up over the course of an entire year. Again, just my hypothesis, but as always, I suspect I'm right. That's a joke. Final point here on volume is that there is an inverse relationship between load and volume. So if you're CSCS certified, if you've spent any time studying in the field of exercise physiology, exercise science, you know that the amount of volume that you can handle is directly tied to the load on the bar. More load on the bar, you can handle significantly less volume, and it takes a lot longer to recover from. So if you do want to train with heavier loads, modulate your volume accordingly. But you can take your load way down and do a ton of volume. My counterpoint to that is, how quality is that volume if the load is extremely low? Again, style, or it's not really style, but a matter of preference, because as long as it's a close proximity to failure, majority of the research would say you'll still grow. Step 7, the last step here is, when I write out a program for someone, this is one of the main questions that I get all the time. How long do I rest? And in my opinion, it's an overblown issue. It's extremely, it's talked about a lot. Like, I think it was like these 2014 bodybuilding.com articles that were like, you gotta rest 30 seconds for curls and 45 seconds for press downs. Rest periods are something that people talk about way too much, and I'm gonna simplify it here for you. So the two questions I'm gonna answer are, how long is not long enough, and how long is too long? So how long is not long enough? If the quality of your work suffers, then you didn't rest long enough. Or if the following set is limited by something other than the muscle that you are intending to train, then you didn't wait long enough. So if you are unable to respond or unable to recover cardiovascularly, or unable to catch your breath, and that's what is limiting your next set, then you haven't rested long enough. So let's say you're doing leg press like this guy here. You do a set of 15 and you wait 30 seconds and then you go again for another set, and you only get like 8 reps because you're huffing and puffing. You didn't wait long enough. You didn't rest long enough. Remember, we're using the leg press to train the quads, not the cardiovascular system. So make sure the muscle that you're training is the limiting factor and not some other physiological system. How long is too long? Well, look at these guys here, all on their phones. They're probably resting too long. So if you're letting yourself get cold, so if you're letting the muscle get cold, you're losing that potentiation of the warm-up effect, or just being warm in general, or you're getting mentally checked out. So you're checking your phone, you're hitting your Instagram, checking your Snapchat, doing all that stuff, you're probably resting too long. And if you don't believe me, I've got a little experiment for you to do. Have your training partner, significant other, whoever it is, follow you around in the gym and track your average rest period when you're not on your phone. And then do it again and have them track your rest period when you are on your phone. What you'll notice is that when you pull your phone out, unintentionally, your rest periods are about twice as long. So put the phone away, put it on airplane mode, stay checked in, be more aware of the muscle, feel the muscle. Is it recovered? Is it ready to go? Is my cardiovascular system ready to go? And if it is, boom, knock it out. Enough of these 2-hour workouts. So on average, what's sufficient rest? 1 to 5 minutes. 5 minutes for your extremely heavy compound stuff, so singles, doubles, close to a max. 1 minute for your lighter isolation stuff, calves, biceps, things like that. So I gave some time periods here. 60 to 90 seconds for the lighter isolation stuff is plenty. 2 to 3 minutes minimum is what you want to give yourself for your strength and your power compound style work. You also want to be consistent from week to week. So if we are trying to add reps from week to week, you can't allow yourself to rest longer. And I'll give you an example. So let's say on week 1, you went in to do pull-ups and you did 10, 9, 8 on pull-ups. The next week, and you rested 60 seconds. So that's important there. You also rested 60 seconds in between sets. The next week you go in, you rest 2 minutes in between sets, and you get 12, 12, 11. Did you get significantly better at pull-ups, or did you just give yourself more time to rest in between sets? So you can see how being inconsistent there may actually give you the false idea that you're progressing more than you actually are. So they are an overblown issue, but it's still something you want to track and be consistent with. Up next. So what's next? Now you are ready to write out your own training program, and we would love to see them. So write out your training program. Send it to us on Instagram. DM us on Instagram with your training program. It's at Gifted Performance. We would love to give you a critique on how you did. As always, like, comment, subscribe. We appreciate all of those. Give us one of those thumbs ups. Hit the notification bell so you know when we are posting videos. Sign up for our $30 a month automated coaching. You get access to 15 training programs as well as macronutrient programming and a place to log your weigh-ins as well as your weights as well as your new 1RMs as you get stronger. If you want a more personalized approach, go with one of our one-on-one coaches. We've got coaches in every discipline: CrossFit, powerlifting, Olympic weightlifting, bodybuilding, general health and fitness, as well as people to help with your posing. So if you've got a competition coming up, you need to work on your posing. We've got 3 people that can help with your posing as well, both male and female. And we've also got 2 doctors of physical therapy on staff that if you've got a little pain, a little bump, bruise, whatever it is, they can help you to return to training faster. You know the drill, guys. Stay gifted, and we're going to see you on the next one. See ya.